The gas station lights cut out at 11:47 p.m., and that's when I heard someone breathing on the other side of the pump. Not me, not the wind breathing. I was standing there with the nozzle in my hand, my truck half full, and the whole town of Coldwater, Montana went black around me like someone had thrown a switch. No storm, no warning, just dark. I called out, nobody answered. Then I heard boots on gravel, slow, deliberate, coming from behind the propane cage. I dropped the nozzle and got in my truck so fast, I left the gas cap hanging open. And I didn't look back until I was doing 70 down Route 2, with my headlights cutting through nothing but black pine and empty road. I didn't know it yet, but that was the night Coldwater showed me what it really was. If you enjoy true horror stories, subscribe for more every week. Now let's begin. My name is Danny Reyes. I grew up in Houston, but my mother was born in Coldwater, a town of about 600 people tucked into the Bitterroot Valley, 3 hours from Missoula if the roads are clear. I hadn't been back since I was 12, since my grandfather's funeral, but when my mother passed in the spring, she left me the old house on Larkspur Road. A lawyer in Missoula called me about it, said the place needed someone to either fix it up or sell it, and since my construction job in Texas had dried up that summer, I figured why not. I told myself it would take 2 weeks, clean the place out, talk to a realtor, head home. I got there on a Tuesday in late September. The drive-in was beautiful, I'll give it that. Mountains on both sides, the kind that still had snow on the peaks even though it was warm down in the valley. The town itself hadn't changed much from what I remembered, one main street. A diner called the Copper Spoon, a hardware store, a Baptist church with white siding. A gas station on the edge of town, the same one where, 3 days later, I'd stand in the dark listening to something breathe. The house was worse than I expected. Dust everywhere, water damage in the back bedroom, mice nesting in the walls. I spent that first day just airing the place out, hauling boxes to the porch, trying to figure out where to even start. It was around 6 in the evening when my neighbor came by, an older man, maybe 70, wearing a flannel jacket even though it wasn't cold yet. "You're Carol's boy," he said, not a question. "Yes, sir, Danny, Frank Cutter, I live across the way." He nodded toward a house with a sagging porch roof, maybe 200 yards down the road. "Sorry about your mother." "She was a good woman, thank you." He looked at the house behind me for a long moment like he was deciding whether to say something. Then he just said, "You need anything, you knock." "Don't wait till dark to come get me, though. I turn in early." I thought that was a strange thing to say, but I didn't think much of it. Small towns have their own rhythms, I told myself. Old men go to bed early, that's all it was. I was wrong about that, too. The Copper Spoon Diner was where I ate most nights that first week, mostly because I hadn't stocked the kitchen and didn't feel like driving 40 minutes to the nearest grocery store in Hamilton. The waitress there, a woman named Patty who looked to be in her 50s, remembered my mother. Carol used to come in every Sunday after church, she told me, refilling my coffee without me asking. Always got the meatloaf, never anything else. Sounds like her, I said. Patty lingered by the table a second longer than felt normal. You staying at the Larkspur house? That's right. Long, just to fix it up, maybe 2 weeks. She nodded slowly and something crossed her face I couldn't quite name, not fear exactly. More like she was calculating something. You lock your doors out there, she said. Even in daylight, why's that? She glanced toward the kitchen window. Toward the tree line that started maybe half a mile behind the restaurant and ran unbroken for miles into the Bitterroot Mountains. We've had some trouble, she said, folks going missing, 2 in the last year, a hiker from Spokane and then Ray Delgado's boy, he was 17. Missing how? Just gone. Walked into the woods behind their property or went out on a drive and never came home. She said it plain, like she was reciting a grocery list, but her hands were tight on the coffee pot. Sheriff says it's mountain lions, or maybe they just ran off. Young folks do that. You don't believe that? Patty didn't answer right away. She topped off my coffee even though it was already full, and the coffee spilled onto the table, and she didn't seem to notice. I believe, she said finally, that some places don't want you asking questions. Coldwater's one of them. You eat your dinner, Danny. Enjoy your stay. And lock your doors. She walked off before I could ask anything else. I didn't think about it too hard that night. I've read enough about small towns to know they run on rumor and superstition, the same way any isolated place does when the nearest real town is an hour's drive and the nearest city is 3. People get bored, people get scared of the dark because there's nothing else keeping their minds busy. But 3 nights later, I started noticing things. The first was small. I'd left a ladder leaning against the side of the house so I could clean out the gutters. When I woke up the next morning, it was lying flat in the yard, like something had knocked it down. I figured it was wind, even though I didn't remember any wind that night. The second thing wasn't so easy to explain. I was in the kitchen around 10 at night, boxing up old dishes when the power went out, not just my house. I looked out the window and the whole street was dark, no porch lights, no street lights, nothing but the moon and the shape of the mountains against the sky. I grabbed a flashlight from my truck and went out to check the breaker box on the side of the house. That's when I heard it. Footsteps out past the tree line at the edge of my property, moving slow, unhurried, like whoever it was knew exactly where they were going and didn't care if I heard them. I called out. Hello, the footsteps stopped. I stood there for what felt like 5 minutes, my flashlight beam shaking because my hand was shaking and nothing moved. No answer, no more footsteps. Just the wind in the pines and my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I went back inside, locked every door, and sat in the living room with a kitchen knife on the coffee table until the power came back on around 1 in the morning. The next day I drove into town for gas, and that's when the power cut out again, right there at the pump, and I heard the breathing behind the propane cage. I didn't wait around to find out what it was. I called the sheriff's office the next morning. A man named Sheriff Boyd Larson came out to the house himself, driving a Chevy Tahoe with the county seal on the door. He was maybe 50, thick through the shoulders, with the kind of tired eyes that come from doing the same job in the same small place for 20-some years. I told him everything, the ladder, the footsteps, the gas station. He listened, nodded, wrote a few things down in a little notebook. Probably kids, he said when I finished. We get some out here messing around at night. Bored teenagers, mostly from Hamilton, come out to the old properties looking to spook people. It didn't feel like kids. Fear does strange things to how we remember sound, he said. Not unkindly. You've been out here alone in an unfamiliar house. I'd feel the same in your shoes. What about the missing people? Patty at the diner told me 2 folks disappeared this year. Something shifted in his face, just slightly, like a door closing halfway. That's a sensitive subject around here, he said. The Delgado boy, that's still an open case, and I'd appreciate you not stirring up the family by asking around. The hiker, that was likely an animal. We get grisly activity up in those hills, more than people realize, but you don't know for sure. I know we did a thorough search both times. I know these mountains are big enough to swallow a body and never give it back. He closed his notebook. You keep your doors locked, Mr. Reyes. That's good advice regardless of what's causing your trouble. And maybe don't wander out at night till you're settled in. He left, and I stood on my porch a long time after his taillights disappeared down Larkspur Road, feeling less reassured than before he'd shown up. Frank Cutter, my neighbor, came by again 2 days after that visit. This time he brought a bottle of homemade jam, said his wife used to make it before she passed, and he still had jars in the cellar he didn't know what to do with. We sat on my porch steps while the sun went down behind the mountains, turning the sky the color of a fresh bruise. Sheriff come out here, he asked. You heard about that? Word travels fast in a town this size. He turned the jam jar in his hands like he was studying it. He tell you it was kids, that's right. Frank made a sound in his throat, something between a laugh and a cough. It ain't kids, you know what it is. He was quiet a long moment, long enough that I thought he wasn't going to answer. There's a family out past the old logging road, he said finally. Kessler's been here longer than the town's had a name, way I understand it. Own about 400 acres backing up to the national forest. Nobody from town goes out that way anymore. Why not? Because things happen to people who do. He looked at me directly then, and his eyes weren't the eyes of a man telling a campfire story. They were the eyes of a man who was scared and trying not to show it. The hiker from Spokane, he was camping near their property line before he went missing. Ray Delgado's boy, he used to run a four-wheeler out that direction, liked to explore. Both of them gone right around Kessler land. Has anyone gone out there to check? County did both times. Found nothing. The Kesslers are polite as church folk when the law comes calling. Offer coffee, let them look wherever they want. He shook his head slowly. But there's something wrong with that family, Danny. I've lived here 51 years and I've watched 3 generations of Kesslers, and every one of them's had that same look. Like they're waiting on something. Like they're patient in a way normal people ain't patient. What do you think is happening? Frank stood up, joints cracking, and looked out toward the dark line of trees at the edge of my property, the same tree line where I'd heard footsteps 3 nights before. I think this town knows more than it says out loud, he said. And I think you should finish up whatever business you got with that house and go home to Texas before the snow comes. He left without finishing his coffee. I should have listened to him. I know that now, but something about the way everyone in Coldwater talked around the subject, dropping hints and then going quiet, made me need to know more. Maybe it was my mother's blood in me, the same stubbornness Patty said she remembered in her. Maybe it was just curiosity doing what curiosity does, pulling you toward the one door everyone tells you not to open. 3 days later, I drove out past the edge of town on the old logging road, telling myself I was just going to look, just drive by, just see the property line and turn around. The road turned to gravel about 2 miles out, then to dirt, cutting through dense pine forest that blocked out most of the afternoon light. My truck bounced over ruts and roots, and after another mile I saw a gate, metal chained with a hand-painted sign that read private property, no trespassing in faded red letters. Behind the gate, the road continued into the trees, disappearing into shadow even though it was only 3 in the afternoon. I parked on the shoulder and got out just to look, just to see what I could see from the road. That's when I noticed the trail camera mounted on a fence post, its little red light blinking, aimed directly at my truck. I got back in and drove home fast, my hands sweating on the wheel, telling myself it didn't mean anything. Ranchers use trail cameras all the time, it's normal, it's nothing. But that night my power went out again, right around 9 o'clock, and this time I heard a vehicle on Larkspur Road, engine idling slow. Headlights sweeping across my living room curtains before moving on into the dark. I didn't sleep at all. The next morning I drove to the Copper Spoon and found Patty at the counter. I went out to the Kessler property yesterday, I told her, keeping my voice low. Her face went pale. She set down the rag she'd been using to wipe the counter. You didn't, just to the gate. I didn't go past it, Danny. She came around the counter and sat across from me, something she'd never done before. You need to understand something. This isn't a story about a spooky old family living out in the woods. People who go looking into Kessler business, they stop being talked about. You understand what I'm telling you, the missing hikers, and others before them going back years. Longer than I've been alive, according to my grandmother. She glanced toward the window, toward the street outside, like she was checking who might be listening. There's stories going back generations about that family taking people, travelers, hitchhikers, folks nobody would miss right away. My grandmother used to say the Kesslers had an arrangement with this town. We don't ask questions about what happens on their land, and in exchange, whatever happens on their land stays on their land and never comes looking for the rest of us. That's insane. That's a small town urban legend. Maybe. Her hands were shaking slightly. But Ray Delgado's boy is still missing, and so is that hiker, and the sheriff searched that property twice and came back both times saying there was nothing there. You believe that a family with 400 acres of forest in the county finds nothing both times. I didn't have an answer for that. Go home, Danny, she said. Sell that house from Texas. Don't come back to finish it yourself. I meant to leave the next morning, I really did. But that night, sometime after midnight, I woke to the sound of something moving around the outside of my house. Not footsteps this time. Something scraping along the siding, slow, deliberate, moving from window to window like it was checking each one. I lay frozen in bed, listening, my heart slamming against my ribs. The scraping stopped outside my bedroom window, then I heard breathing. The same breathing I'd heard at the gas station, low and steady, right on the other side of the glass, maybe 2 feet from where I was lying. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. I stared at the window in the dark, watching the curtain, waiting to see if it would move, if a hand would push through, if anything at all would happen. After what felt like an hour, but was probably only a few minutes, the breathing stopped, and I heard footsteps moving away, back toward the tree line, unhurried. The same patient pace Frank had described in the Kesslers themselves. I didn't sleep again that night. At first light, I packed everything I could fit into my truck, called the lawyer in Missoula to say I'd deal with the rest of the house long distance, and got ready to leave Coldwater for good. I should have just driven straight out on Route 2 and never looked back. Instead, I made one last stop at the sheriff's office to report what had happened. Sheriff Larson wasn't in. A deputy took my statement, a younger man named Cole, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world than sitting across from me hearing about breathing outside a bedroom window. You said you went out to the Kessler property, he said, reading back over his notes. Just to the gate, he set his pen down. I'm going to give you some advice, and I need you to actually take it this time. Leave town today. Don't come back for your things. Don't come back to sell the house. Just leave and don't mention the Kesslers to anyone else while you're still inside the county line. Why? What aren't you telling me? He glanced toward the door, toward the front office where I could hear another deputy talking on the phone. Because 2 months ago, he said quietly, I drove out to that property on a welfare check alone without backup, because that's how thin we're stretched out here. And I saw something in the tree line I've spent every night since trying to forget. I'm not going to describe it to you. I'm just going to tell you that whatever's living out on that land, it's not an animal and it's not a ghost story. And it's not something 4 deputies and a sheriff can handle when this county doesn't have the budget or the manpower to even try. So the arrangement Patty probably already told you about, the one where this town looks the other way, it's not because we're cowards. It's because we already lost people trying to stop it and we can't lose any more. You're telling me you just let them keep doing this. I'm telling you, Cole said. And his voice cracked slightly, that some of us have families in this town and we can't protect them and hunt monsters at the same time. So we protect our families and we tell people like you to leave before it's too late for you too. I left Coldwater that afternoon, my truck loaded with as much as I could carry. My mother's house left behind unfinished, and I drove straight through to Missoula without stopping, checking my mirrors the entire way like something might be following. I never went back. I sold the house to a stranger through the lawyer, sight unseen, at half of what it was worth, just to be done with it. But 2 weeks after I got home to Texas, I got a call from an unknown number with a Montana area code. It was Frank Cutter. Just wanted you to know, he said, his voice thin and far away. They found the Delgado boys' 4-wheeler yesterday, out past the Kessler fence line. Where the county swears they searched twice already and found nothing at all. Did they find him? No, Frank said. Just the 4-wheeler, sitting there in a clearing that wasn't there before, like the trees had grown up different around it. I asked him what he meant, but the line had already gone dead. I never called that number again, and it never called me. But some nights when the house is quiet and I'm the only one awake, I still think about that breathing on the other side of the gas pump, patient and slow. The same unhurried patience Frank said ran in the blood of that family out past the logging road. And I wonder how many towns like Coldwater are still out there, still keeping the same arrangement, still telling newcomers it was only kids in the dark. Story 2, the house on Meridian Street. My name is Sarah Voss, and this happened in a town called Ellsworth, Wyoming, population just under 400. The kind of place where everybody knows your truck by sight before they know your name. I'd moved there 2 years ago for a teaching job at the elementary school, renting a small house on Meridian Street that had been empty for almost a decade before I signed the lease. The landlord, a rancher named Hal Osgood, told me the previous tenants had simply moved away, nothing more to it, and the rent was low enough that I didn't ask many follow-up questions. The first month was quiet. I unpacked slowly, got to know a few of the other teachers, settled into the rhythm of a town where the whole main street shut down by 7 in the evening. I liked the quiet. I liked that I could see stars from my back porch without any city light washing them out. The knocking started my third week in the house, always at 2 a.m. Always 3 knocks, evenly spaced, patient, like whoever was doing it had all the time in the world. The first time I called out asking who was there, no answer. I looked through the window and saw nothing, no car in the road, no figure walking away, just the dark street and the wind moving through the cottonwoods. I told myself it was kids. Small towns get that kind of mischief, teenagers looking for something to do on a boring night. But it kept happening every few nights, always the same 3 knocks, always at the same hour, and never once did I see anyone on my security camera, which I'd installed after the second week specifically to catch whoever it was. That should have been impossible. The camera had a clear view of my entire porch. There was nowhere to stand that would keep a person out of frame while still being close enough to knock on my door. I started sleeping with the lamp on in my bedroom, telling myself it was just easier to fall back asleep that way after being startled awake. I stopped inviting friends over on weeknights, worried they'd hear it too and think I was losing my mind, or worse, that they'd hear nothing at all and I'd have to explain what I was hearing by myself, night after night, with no proof beyond my own exhaustion. I brought this up at the diner one morning, mentioned it to the waitress, a woman named Dot who lived in Ellsworth her whole life. She went quiet, then lined in clothes. "You're not the first one in that house to hear that," she said. "The family before you, the Hendersons, they heard it too. 3 knocks, no one there. They moved out inside of 6 months, wouldn't say why exactly, just packed up and left in a hurry. Do you know what causes it?" Dot glanced toward the window, toward the mountains rising up behind the town. "There's old stories about a man who used to live out past the edge of town, back in my grandmother's time. Did something terrible to a family who wouldn't sell him their land. After that, people said anybody living in a house he'd once wanted for himself would hear those same 3 knocks. Like he was still trying to get someone to answer the door and let him in. I didn't believe in ghosts, and I don't think Dot did either, not really. What she was describing sounded more like folklore built up around something people didn't want to name directly, something more human and more frightening than a restless spirit. I asked her outright if she thought a person was doing it, a real living person, and she just shrugged and told me some questions in a town like Ellsworth are better left unasked, because the answers tend to follow you home. I decided to stay awake one night and catch whoever was doing it, hiding in my darkened living room with the porch light off, watching the door through a gap in the curtains. I brought a baseball bat from the hall closet and set it across my knees, and I told myself if it was kids, I'd finally get to see their faces and put an end to it. At 2 a.m. exactly, the knocks came. 3 of them slow, deliberate, and this time I was watching the door the entire time, and I swear to you there was no one there. No shape, no movement. Just the sound of knuckles against wood, coming from a door that had nobody standing in front of it. I sat frozen for a long moment, the bat forgotten in my lap, and then I did something I still can't fully explain. I got up, walked to the door, and pressed my palm flat against the wood, right where the knocking had come from. It was warm, not room temperature, warm like a hand had just been resting there. I pulled my hand back so fast, I knocked over a lamp behind me. The next morning, I checked the camera footage frame by frame, and there's a 2-second gap in the timestamp right at 2 a.m. A gap my security company later told me shouldn't be possible unless the device had lost power, except my router logs showed the camera never went offline at all. Before I made the decision to leave for good, I tried one more thing. I called a locksmith from Cheyenne, a 2-hour drive, and had him replace every lock on the house, front door, back door, even the old storm cellar hatch around the side that I'd never once used. I told myself if someone was getting in physically, somehow avoiding both the camera and my own eyes, new locks would settle the question one way or another. The knocking came again 4 nights later, same as always, 3 slow strikes against the wood. New locks, same result. I stood at that door for a long time afterward, running my fingers along the fresh brass deadbolt, and I remember thinking that whatever was happening, it clearly had nothing to do with anyone's ability to pick a lock or slip through a door. I moved out 2 weeks later. I never got an explanation, and I never went back to that house, even to collect the rest of my things. I paid a neighbor $50 to grab my boxes for me instead, and I asked her, half joking, half not, to knock 3 times on the door before she went in, just to see what would happen. She told me afterward she didn't think that was funny, and she wouldn't do it again if I asked. I don't know what was knocking on that door. But I know it wasn't kids, and I know Hal Osgood has rented that house to 3 different families since I left, and every single one of them has moved out within the year. The most recent family, I heard through a former coworker, left behind almost everything, including a dining room set, just to avoid spending one more night packing inside that house after dark. Story 3, The Man Who Counted Cars. This next story comes from a woman named Rita Palmer, out of a town called Coyote Flat, Arizona, a place so small it doesn't even have its own zip code. Just borrows one from the county seat 20 miles away. Rita told me she'd lived in Coyote Flat her entire adult life, married a rancher, raised 2 kids. Never had a single reason to feel unsafe until the summer a stranger started standing at the crossroads outside town every single evening at dusk. He didn't do anything threatening, not at first. He just stood there at the intersection where the county road met the highway, watching the cars go by. He wasn't hitchhiking. He never held up a sign or waved anyone down. He just stood and watched and counted, moving his lips silently like he was keeping track of something only he understood. The town noticed him within a few days. Somebody mentioned it to the sheriff, a part-time deputy who covered 3 counties and couldn't spare much time for a man who technically wasn't breaking any laws by standing on public land. The deputy drove out once, asked the man a few routine questions, and came back saying the man gave his name as Ilyas. Said he was just passing through and liked the quiet of the crossroads in the evening, nothing more to it. But he didn't leave. He came back the next evening and the one after that, always at the same hour, always in the same spot, rain or shine, and after the first week, people in town stopped mentioning him out loud. The way you stop mentioning a bad smell, you've decided you can't do anything about. Rita started noticing something else, though. The man seemed to know things about the cars that passed. He'd nod at certain vehicles like he recognized them, and a few days later, those same vehicles would show up parked outside a house that had been sold, moving trucks in the driveway. Families packing up and leaving town without much explanation. At first I thought it was coincidence, Rita told me, but it happened 4 times that summer. He'd watch a car go by, nod like he knew something about it, and within 2 weeks that family would be gone. She started asking around quietly, trying to figure out if anyone else had noticed the pattern. An older neighbor, a widow named Connie who'd lived on the same road for 40 years, told her she'd seen the same thing happen once before, decades earlier. A different man standing at that same crossroads the summer before 3 families left town all at once. She told me it happened again roughly every 20 years, Rita said. like clockwork. She didn't know why and she didn't want to guess out loud, but she made me promise not to let him get a good look at our truck. The fifth time it happened, it was Rita's own car he nodded at, driving her kids home from school. She didn't sleep well after that. Within days, strange things started happening around her house. Her mailbox was found lying in the road, twisted like something had wrenched it clean off its post. Her dog, normally calm, wouldn't stop barking at the tree line behind their property after dark. She started keeping a loaded shotgun by the back door, something she'd never done in 20 years of ranch living, and her husband, a practical man who didn't scare easily, started walking the property line himself every night before bed with a flashlight. One night, driving home from her sister's house in the next town over, she noticed a vehicle behind her, headlights matching her speed exactly, for nearly 15 miles of empty highway. Never closing the distance, never falling back. She sped up, the headlights sped up with her, keeping the exact same distance, like whoever was driving wanted her to know they could match her pace at will. She called her husband from the truck, kept him on the line until she pulled into their driveway, and the vehicle behind her simply kept driving straight past without slowing, taillights disappearing into the dark. She said she never got a look at the driver, only the shape of the vehicle itself, an old sedan she didn't recognize from anywhere in the county. 2 nights later, Rita found fresh footprints circling the entire perimeter of her house, evenly spaced, deliberate. The kind of tracks left by someone walking slowly and carefully, rather than searching for a way in. Her husband followed them out toward the tree line and lost them completely at the property fence, like whoever made them had simply stopped existing at that exact point. Rita's husband wanted to bring the footprints to the sheriff, but by the time the deputy came out, a hard wind had blown through overnight and scattered the dirt enough that nothing usable remained. Just faint depressions that could have been anything. The deputy suggested coyotes. Though Rita said coyote tracks don't walk in a perfect circle around a house and stop clean at a fence line like they'd been called back by something waiting on the other side. That same week, her youngest boy came in from playing in the yard and asked her, in the plain way kids ask things that adults find horrifying, why the man from the crossroads had been standing at the edge of their driveway watching him. Rita hadn't seen anyone. She ran outside immediately and found nothing, no footprints, no sign anyone had been there at all, but her son insisted, describing a man in a gray jacket who'd simply stood still and watched him for a while before turning and walking off toward the highway. The man at the crossroads disappeared himself about 2 weeks after that, gone as suddenly as he'd first appeared, and nobody in Coyote Flat ever learned who he was or what he was counting. But 3 more families left town that summer without warning, packing up in a hurry the same way the others had. And Rita says she still checks her mirrors every single time she drives that stretch of highway after dark, half expecting to see those same matched headlights behind her again. We never found out what he wanted, she told me, but I've thought about it for years, and the only thing that makes sense to me is that he was choosing people. And I don't know what for, and I don't want to know, and I thank God every day my family wasn't the one he decided to come back for. She told me one last thing before we ended our conversation. Something she said she'd never told anyone outside her own family. The week after the man disappeared, Connie, the old widow who'd warned her about the 20-year pattern, passed away quietly in her sleep. And in the last conversation they ever had, Connie told Rita that the reason the pattern repeated every 2 decades wasn't coincidence at all. She said it was because that's how long it takes him to come back and finish counting, Rita said. I still don't know what she meant by that. I'm not sure I want to be around when I find out. Story 4. The voice on the scanner. The last story comes from a retired police dispatcher named Gene Holloway, who spent 11 years working nights for a small department in a town called Marrow Creek, Idaho, before he transferred out to a bigger county and never looked back. Jean told me that small town dispatch work is mostly quiet. Fender benders, domestic calls, the occasional bar fight outside the one tavern in town. Nothing that would prepare a person for what he heard come through his scanner on a January night 8 years ago. It started as normal traffic, a deputy named Miller calling in a welfare check on a house at the edge of town, an elderly resident whose family hadn't heard from her in a few days. Standard stuff. Jean logged the call and expected a routine update within 20 minutes, and he told me he even had time to pour a second cup of coffee before Miller radioed back in. Miller's voice came back on scratchy and tense. "Dispatch, I'm at the residence, front doors open. I'm going to need you to stay on with me." That wasn't normal procedure, but Jean stayed on the line, listening as Miller narrated his way through the house, footsteps on old floorboards. A television playing static in an empty living room, the smell of something burnt in the kitchen that he couldn't identify. "Kitchen's empty," Miller said. "Stove's off, but there's a smell like something's been burning for hours. No sign of the resident." Moving toward the back of the house, Jean told me he could hear the floorboards groaning under Miller's weight through the radio, each step slow and careful. The sound of a man trying not to make noise in a house that already felt wrong to him. "Dispatch, there's a door to the basement. It's open and I can hear something down there. Sounds like somebody counting." "Counting what?" Jean asked him. There was a long pause. Then Miller's voice came back, quieter now. "I don't know, numbers, just numbers over and over. I'm going to go check." Jean told me those next few minutes were the longest of his career. He could hear Miller's footsteps on the stairs, the creak of old wood, his breathing getting faster. "I can hear it clearer now," Miller said. "It's not loud. It's like somebody whispering numbers to themselves in the dark. 12, 13, 14. Just counting up slow over and over." "Miller, I want you to hold position and wait for backup," Jean told him, but Miller didn't answer directly. And Jean could hear his breathing getting shallower, faster, the sound of a man trying to keep himself calm and failing at it. "Dispatch, I need you to send backup." "Now, what do you see, Miller?" Another long pause, filled only with static, and then Miller said something Jean has never fully explained to his own satisfaction in the 8 years since. "There's nobody down here, but I can still hear the counting. It's coming from inside the walls." Jean said he felt his whole body go cold at those words. Sitting alone in the dispatch office at 3 in the morning, with nobody else on shift to confirm what he was hearing. He kept Miller talking, asking him simple questions, trying to keep him grounded, trying to buy time until the second unit could reach the property. "Miller, can you see a light switch?" "I want you to get some light down there." "Found one," Miller said, flipping it now. Silence. Then very quietly, Miller said, "The counting stopped. Did the lights come on?" "Yeah," Miller said, "basement's empty. Nothing down here but some old furniture and a chest freezer against the far wall. But dispatch, the counting, it's coming from somewhere closer now. It's not in the walls anymore. Where is it coming from?" The line went dead after that, not disconnected, just silent, no more static, nothing. Jean said he sat there calling Miller's unit number over and over into a radio that gave him nothing back, counting the seconds himself without meaning to. The way you count your own heartbeat when you're scared enough. Backup arrived within 12 minutes, and they found Miller sitting on the basement stairs, unharmed but shaking, unable to explain what he'd seen or heard beyond what he'd already radioed in. He kept repeating that the counting had been close, closer than the walls could explain, and he wouldn't go back down into that basement, even with 3 other deputies standing beside him. The search teams went through that property for 4 straight days, bringing in dogs from a neighboring county, walking grid patterns through the woods behind the house, checking the old well on the property and every outbuilding on the lot. They found nothing. No sign of forced entry, no sign of a struggle, no indication the woman had left under her own power either. Since her car remained parked in the garage and her purse sat untouched on the kitchen counter, cash and all still inside it. Jean said the case file sat open for years afterward, one of only 2 unsolved disappearances in the department's history. And every new dispatcher who came through the office eventually asked him about it once they found the file buried in the archive room. He always told them the same version he told me, careful never to add anything he couldn't confirm firsthand. Though he admitted the version he kept in his own head was worse than the one he ever put into words for anyone else. The homeowner was never found, not that night, not in the search that followed over the next several days, not ever. Her house was sold at auction 2 years later, and Jean said the family who bought it moved out within 6 months, citing noise complaints they refused to elaborate on to the realtor. One of them, a young mother, told a neighbor before they left that she'd started hearing counting of her own, coming from her daughter's closet late at night. Always starting around 12 and climbing higher, never once starting over from 1. "I don't scare easy," Jean told me, sitting across from me at a diner counter years after he'd left that department behind. 20-some years in law enforcement, I've seen things that would turn most people's stomachs, but I've never forgotten that counting. Because right before the line went dead for just a second, it sounded like it wasn't coming from inside the walls at all anymore. Where was it coming from? Jean was quiet a long moment before he answered. It sounded like it was coming from right behind Miller, close enough to touch him. And he never once mentioned turning around to look. I asked Jean if he ever found out what happened to Miller after that night, whether he stayed on the force, whether he ever talked about it again. "He put in for a transfer 3 weeks later," Jean said. "Never discussed that call again, not once, not even when I brought it up years later over drinks. But I noticed something the last time I saw him. He'd started wearing a watch that counted down instead of up. Said he liked knowing exactly how much time he had left before something instead of how much had already passed." Jean never asked him what he meant by that, and Miller never offered to explain.